The midday sun hung low and hot above the dust-choked plains, turning every breath into a struggle and every shadow into a refuge. Yet nothing in that merciless desert felt more suffocating than the silence gripping Calhoun, auction yard on that fateful afternoon, when 6 young Apache girls were strung upside down from a thick wooden beam as if they were little more than spectacles for a restless crowd. The yard was packed shoulder to shoulder with ranchers, drifters, prospectors, and hired guns, each man drawn less by cruelty and more by the morbid curiosity that came whenever the local marshal claimed he was teaching a lesson to the tribes for resisting forced relocation. The girls, dressed in traditional Apache garments beaded with symbols of wind, sun, and strength, dangled quietly with braids reaching toward the dusty ground, their calm expressions masking the fear twisting inside them. Some in the audience looked uneasy, others indifferent, but not a soul dared speak against the marshal, a man whose reputation for ruthless justice had been forged in a dozen violent standoffs. A horse snorted near the railing, and the sound echoed the tension, saturating the air like gunpowder. Sheriff Brenner, tall and scarred from past wars, strutted across the yard proclaiming that the Apache had stolen cattle and harbored fugitives, accusations flimsy enough that even the dust seemed to question them. Still, the marshal waved his pistol, demanding obedience from the crowd and silence from anyone tempted to object. Rumors had been circulating for weeks about a missing ranch hand found dead near the reservation borders, and the marshal insisted the Apaches had been behind it. No proof, no inquiry, just anger and the need for a scapegoat. As the girls remained suspended, their cheeks reddened by the blood pooling in their heads, the crowd shifted uneasily, sensing that this display had little to do with justice and everything to do with intimidation. No cries came from the girls. Trained from youth to face hardship with defiance, they whispered prayers only they could hear. Little did the marshal know that among the onlookers stood a man who had spent years living between worlds, Calder, a respected but solitary rancher whose homestead sat along the rocky line between settler land and Apache territory. Calder had traded with the tribe, shared meals with them, and even learned enough of their language to hold conversations around campfires. He knew the Apache ways, not as a threat but as a culture built on honor, loyalty, and survival. As he dismounted his horse at the edge of the crowd, he noticed something the others didn't: the intricate tattoos on the girls' arms, faint but unmistakable, each representing a unique lineage within the Apache Nation's most sacred families. These marks weren't symbols of criminals. They were marks of chosen protectors, daughters of leaders who upheld ancient responsibilities. As the marshal paced beneath them, boasting that the girls would hang upside down until nightfall, or longer if needed, Calder's jaw tightened. He had seen brutality before, but this was different. This was the kind of cruelty that could ignite war. The longer he stared, the more his gut twisted, with the knowledge that these children weren't thieves or rebels. They were emissaries, trained to guide peace talks between their people and local settlers. The marshal's actions threatened not just their lives but the fragile stability across the entire valley. Calder quietly pushed through the crowd, feeling eyes slide toward him with caution. Everyone knew he carried the respect of both sides, and for that reason alone, his presence made the marshal uneasy. When Brenner finally noticed him approaching, he sneered and rested a hand on his pistol grip. "Calder Haynes," he barked, "come to learn how justice is carried out?" Calder kept his voice calm as he replied, "Those girls aren't criminals. Look at their arms, Brenner. You're making a mistake you won't be able to take back." The marshal scoffed, clearly unfamiliar with tribal markings and uninterested in learning. The tension swirled like dust devils across the yard, but Calder wasn't backing down. They exchanged a long stare, the kind that felt like two storms colliding, and for a heartbeat even the crowd seemed to hold its breath. Calder knew he was outnumbered. Guns hung from every belt, and the marshal's men were never far from trouble. But he also knew that letting 6 innocent girls die would shatter the brittle peace that kept settlers safe in their beds at night. Before he could speak again, one of the girls opened her eyes and met his gaze, a silent plea that carried the weight of her people and the urgency of time slipping away. That was the moment Calder made his decision. Whatever came next, he would not walk away. And so, in that heated silence, beneath the unforgiving western sun, a story larger than any man began to unfold. Calder felt every eye in the auction yard latch onto him as he stepped forward, the dust swirling around his boots like a warning whisper from the earth itself. But he ignored it, focusing only on the marshal whose smirk spread across his face like oil on water, confident that power, raw and unchallenged, was on his side. Calder, however, was not a man driven by bravado. He was driven by principle, by a sense of justice carved into him through years of hard work, long rides and friendships born at the edges of two worlds. "Brenner, those tattoos aren't what you think they are," he said firmly, pointing toward the girls, their braids brushing the ground like fragile pendulums, marking the passing seconds. "They're symbols of leadership, sacred families. You kill them, you're not punishing thieves. You're declaring war on the Apache nation." The marshal barked a laugh, mocking and loud, amplified by his henchmen who chuckled on command. "War? They're already stirring up trouble. Maybe this'll shut him up." Calder clenched his fists but kept his voice steady, knowing anger would only escalate things. "Their families have kept peace with you for years. You kill their daughters, you destroy everything we've built." "Here," Brenner's eyes narrowed, as he took a step closer, his voice dropping low enough that only Calder and the girls could hear. "You think I care about peace? Peace doesn't get men like me respect. Fear does." Calder saw it then. This wasn't about justice or order. This was about dominance. Brenner wanted control, wanted the settlers to see him as the man who could keep the land in line. But that thirst for power had turned him blind, reckless. Calder exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs. With the crowd watching, he raised his voice. "If what you want is fear, then you're not law. You're just another outlaw hiding behind a badge." The yard erupted in murmurs. Calling the marshal an outlaw was the kind of statement that could get a man shot before he finished speaking. Brenner's hand shot to his weapon, but Calder was faster, not with a gun, but with his words. "If you're so certain they're guilty," Calder said loudly, "let me speak for them. Let me stand as witness. You want justice? Prove it by letting them face a fair hearing, not a death show." His demand forced the crowd to reconsider their silence. A few men nodded faintly. Others shifted uncomfortably. Even those who disliked the Apache knew the marshal was crossing lanes no lawman should. The tension cracked, and Brenner, sensing the crowd slipping from his control, growled, "Fine. You want to speak for them? Then you're responsible for what happens next." He motioned to his men to cut the girls down. The ropes loosened, and the 6 young Apaches were carefully lowered, their limbs weak but their spirits unbroken. Calder caught one as she stumbled, steadying her gently. Her eyes shimmered with gratitude, though she said nothing. Brenner's voice boomed across the yard once more. 3 days, he announced. 3 days to prove their innocence. Fail, and I'll hang all 7 of you myself." Calder knew the odds were stacked, but he accepted regardless. The girls' tattoos, symbols of their families, would guide him to the truth. He saddled his horse, helped the girls onto spare mounts provided by sympathetic ranchers, and rode out of town as whispers rippled behind them like the gathering winds of a storm. For the next 2 days, Calder followed every lead, speaking to trappers, scouts, and border riders. He discovered the truth that cattle theft had been staged by a pair of white rustlers, hoping to spark conflict that would distract from their illegal land grab. Evidence gathered, witnesses aligned. Calder returned on the 3rd, morning with proof strong enough to break the marshal's scheme. The people of the town listened as he laid out every detail, and when he was done, their eyes turned toward Brenner, not with admiration but with suspicion. The marshal reached for his weapon, desperate to regain control, but this time the crowd didn't back him. Several men stepped forward, guns drawn, forcing him to surrender his badge. Justice reclaimed the yard that day, not because guns were drawn, but because truth triumphed over brutality. As Calder helped the 6 Apache girls reunite with their families at the reservation border, the youngest approached him with a small carved token, a symbol of gratitude and alliance. "You saw us when no one else did," she whispered. Calder nodded humbly. "You were worth seeing." The story of Calder's stand spread from campfire to saloon, from ranch house to trading post, becoming one of the West's most whispered tales, not of violence, but of bravery, unity, and the courage to defend what is right, even when standing alone. And if you enjoyed this story, if you want more powerful tales of forgotten heroes and the untold corners of wild West history, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and inspires us to bring you even more gripping legends from the frontier.